Here is chapter 4 of Robert Greene's The Concise Mastery. See people as they are. Social intelligence. Often the greatest obstacle to our pursuit of mastery comes from the emotional drain we experience in dealing with resistance and manipulations of the people around us. The principal problem we face in the social arena is our naive tendency to project onto people our emotional needs and desires of the moment. Social intelligence is the ability to see people in the most realistic light possible. By moving past our usual self-absorption, we can learn to focus deeply on others, reading their behavior in the moment, seeing what motivates them, and discerning any possible manipulative tendencies. Success attained without this intelligence is not true mastery and will not last. Thinking inside. In 1718, Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, went to work as an apprenticeship in his brother James' printing shop in Boston. His dream was to transform himself into a great writer. At the printing shop, he would not only be taught how to handle the machines, but also how to end manuscripts. Surrounded by books and newspapers, he would have plenty of examples of good writing to study and learn from. As the apprenticeship progressed, the literary education he had imagined for himself came to pass, and his writing skills improved immensely. Then, in 1722, it seemed that he would finally have the perfect opportunity to prove himself as a writer. His brother was about to launch his own large-scale newspaper called the New England Courant. Benjamin approached James with several interesting ideas for stories he could write. But to his great disappointment, his brother was not interested in his contributing to the new paper. Benjamin knew it was pointless to argue with James. He was a very stubborn young man. But as he thought about the situation, an idea came to him. What if he were to create a fictional character who would write letters to the Courant? If he wrote them well enough, James would never suspect they were from Benjamin, and he would print them. After thinking, he decided upon the perfect character to create. A young female widow named Silence Dogood, who had lots of strong opinions about life in Boston, many of them quite absurd. Enthusiasm for a scheme would rarely last more than a week. He had no money to lend, and his character was worth about as much as his promises. As Franklin took this all in and considered his current predicament, what disturbed him was not that he found himself in a precarious position, alone and without money, far from home. There was no place more exciting for a young man than London, and he would somehow make his way there. What bothered him was how badly he had misread Keith and how naive he had been. Fortunately, London was teeming London. As Franklin took this all in and considered his current predicament, what disturbed him was not that he now found himself in a precarious position, alone and without money, far from home. There was no place more exciting for a young man than London, and he would somehow make his way there. What bothered him was how badly he had misread Keith and how naive he had been. Fortunately, London was teeming with large-scale printing shops, and within a few weeks of his arrival, he found a position within one of them. He got along well enough with his colleagues, but soon he encountered a strange British custom. 5 times a day, his fellow printers would take a break to drink a pint of beer. It fortified them for the work, or so they said. Every week, Franklin was expected to contribute to the beer fund for those in the room, including himself, but he refused to pay up. He did not like to drink during working hours, and the idea that he should give up a part of his hard-earned wages for others to ruin their health made him angry. He spoke honestly about his principles, and they politely accepted his decision. Over the ensuing weeks, however, strange things began to happen. Mistakes kept popping up in text he had already proofread, and had almost every day he noticed some new error for which he was blamed. Clearly somebody was sabotaging his work, and when he complained to his fellow printers, they attributed it all to a mischievous ghost who was known to haunt the room. Finally, figuring out what this meant, he let go of his principles and contributed to the beer fund, the mistake suddenly disappearing along with the ghost. After this incident and several other indiscretions in London, Franklin began to seriously wonder about himself. He seemed hopelessly naive, constantly misreading the intentions of people around him. Thinking about this problem, he was struck by an apparent paradox when it came to his work. He was supremely rational and realistic, always looking to improve himself, but with people it was virtually the opposite. He would inevitably become swept up in his emotions and lose all contact with reality. With his brother, he wanted to impress him by revealing his authorship of the letters, totally unaware of the envy and malevolence he would unleash. With Keith, he was so wrapped up in his dreams that he paid no attention to obvious signs that the governor was all talk. With the printers, his anger blinded him to the fact that they would obviously resent his attempts at reform. Determined to break this pattern and change his ways, he decided there was only one solution. In all of his future interactions with people, he would force himself to take an initial step backwards and not get emotional. From this more detached position, he would focus completely on the people he was dealing with, cutting off his own insecurities and desires from the equation. Gaining position inside people's minds, he could see how to melt their resistance or thwart their malevolent plans. After more than a year and a half of work in London, Franklin finally saved enough money for his return journey to the colonies, and in 1727 he found himself back in Philadelphia, looking once more for work. In the midst of his search, his former employer, Samuel Keimer, surprised him by offering Franklin a nice position in the printing shop. He would be in charge of the staff and training the others Keimer had recently hired as a part of his expanding business. For this, he would receive a nice year's salary. Franklin accepted, but almost from the beginning he could sense something was not right. And so, as he had promised himself, he took a step back and calmly reviewed the facts. He had 5 men to train, but once he accomplished this task, there would be little work left over for him. Keimer himself had been acting strangely, much friendlier than usual. He was an insecure and prickly gentleman, and this friendly front did not fit him. Imagining the situation from Keimer's perspective, he could sense that he must have greatly resented Franklin's sudden departure from London, leaving him in the lurch. He must have seen Franklin as a young whippersnapper who needed his comeuppance. He was not the type to discuss this with anyone, but would seethe from within and scheme on his own. Thinking in this way, Keimer's intention became clear to him. He was planning to get Franklin to impart his extensive knowledge of this business to the new employees, then fire him. This would be his revenge. Certain he had read this correctly, he decided to quietly turn the tables. He used his managerial position to build relationships with customers and to connect with successful merchants in the area. He experimented with some new manufacturing methods he had learned in England. When Keimer was away from the shop, he taught himself new skills such as engraving and ink making. He paid close attention to his pupils and carefully cultivated one of them to be a first-rate assistant. And just when he suspected that Keimer was about to fire him, he left and set up his own shop with financial backing. Greater knowledge of the business, a solid base of customers who would follow him everywhere. At a first-rate assistant whom he had trained in executing this strategy, Franklin noticed how free he was from any feelings of bitterness or anger toward Keimer. It was all maneuvers on a chessboard, and by thinking inside Keimer, he was able to play the game to perfection, with a clear and level head. Over the ensuing years, Franklin's printing business prospered. He became an increasingly prominent member of the Philadelphia community, even entering into politics. He was thought of as the quintessence of the trustworthy merchant and citizen. Like his fellow townsfolk, he dressed plainly. He worked harder than anyone they knew. He never frequented bars or gambling houses, and he had a folksy and even humble manner. His popularity was almost universal, but in the last public chapter of his life, he acted in a way that seemed to indicate that he had changed and lost his common touch. In 1766, A year after the outbreak of the War of Independence, Franklin, now a distinguished political figure in America, was dispatched to France as a special commissioner to obtain arms, financing, and an alliance. Soon stories spread throughout the colonies of his various intrigues with Frenchwomen and courtesans, and of his attendance at lavish parties and dinners, much of which was true. Prominent politicians such as John Adams accused him of becoming corrupted by the Parisians. His popularity among Americans plummeted, but what the critics and public did not realize was that whenever he went, he assumed the look, the outward morals, and the behavior of the culture at hand so that he could better make his way. Desperate to win the French over to the American cause and understanding their nature quite well, he had transformed himself into what they had wanted him to see in him, the American version of the French spirit and way of life. He was appealing to their notorious narcissism. All of this worked to perfection. Franklin became a beloved figure to the French and a man of influence with their government. In the end, he brokered in an important military alliance and gained the kind of financing nobody else could have wrested from the stingy French king. This final public act in his life was not an aberration, but the ultimate application of his social rationality. Keys to mastery. We humans are the preeminent social animal. In theory, all of us today possess the natural tools, empathy, rational thinking, to have a supreme understanding of our fellow humans. In practice, however, these tools remain mostly undeveloped, and the explanation for this can be found in the peculiar nature of our childhood and our extended period of dependency. During this time of weakness and dependency, we experience the need to idealize our parents. Our survival depends on their strength and reliability. To think of them as having their own frailties would fill us up with unbearable anxiety, and so we inevitably see them as stronger, more capable, and selfless than they are in reality. Then inevitability comes often in adolescence. We start to glimpse a less than noble side to many people, including our parents, and we cannot help but feel upset at the disparity between what we had imagined and the reality. In our disappointment, we tend to exaggerate their negative qualities much as we had exaggerated the positive ones. Let's call this the naive perspective. Although it is natural to have such a perspective because of the unique character of our childhood, it is also dangerous because it envelops us in childish illusions about people, distorting our view of them. We carry this perspective with us into the adult world and to the apprenticeship phase. In the work environment, the stakes are suddenly raised. People reveal qualities of their characters that they normally try to conceal. They manipulate, compete, and think of themselves first. We are blindsided by this behavior, and our emotions are churned up even more than before, locking us into the naive perspective. This perspective makes us feel sensitive and vulnerable, looking inward as to how the words and actions of others implicate us in some way. We continually misread their intentions. We project our own feelings onto them. We have no real sense of what they are thinking or what motivates them. With the inevitable mistakes we make, we become entangled in battles and dramas that consume our minds and distract us from learning. Our sense of priorities become warped. We end up giving far too much importance to social and political issues because we are not handling them well. Social intelligence is nothing more than the process of discarding the naive perspective and approaching something more realistic. It involves focusing our attention outward instead of inward, honing the observational and empathetic skills that we naturally possess. It means moving past our tendency to idealize and demonize people, and seeing and accepting them as they are. Following Benjamin Franklin's example, you can reach this awareness by reviewing your past, paying particular attention to any battles, mistakes, tensions, or disappointments in the social front. If you look at these events through their lens of the naive perspective, you will focus only on what other people have done to you, the mistreatments you endured from them, the slights or injuries you felt. Instead, you must turn this around and begin with yourself, how you saw in others qualities they did not possess, or how you ignored signs of a dark side to their nature. This new clarity about your perspective should be accompanied by an adjustment of your attitude. The world is full of people with different characters and temperaments. You cannot change people at their core, but must merely avoid becoming their victim. You are an observer of the human comedy, and by being as tolerant as possible, you gain a much greater ability to understand people and to influence their behavior when necessary. With this new awareness and attitude in place, you can begin to advance in your apprenticeship in social intelligence. The intelligence consists of two components, both equally important to master. First, there is what we shall call specific knowledge of human nature, namely the ability to read people, to get a feel for how they see the world, and to understand their individuality. Second, there is a general knowledge of human nature, which means accumulating an understanding of the overall patterns of human behavior that transcended us all as individuals, including some of the darker qualities we often disregarded. Only the possession of both forms of knowledge can give you a complete picture of the people around you. Specific knowledge, reading people. Most of us had most of us have had the sensation at one point in our lives of experiencing an uncanny connection with another person. In such moments, we have an understanding that is hard to put into words. We even feel that we can anticipate the thoughts of the other person. Such communication generally occurs with close friends and partners, people whom we trust and feel attuned to on many levels. In these moments of connection, these internal monologues is shut off, and we pick up more cues and signals from the other person than usual. What this means is that when we are not inward directed, but attending more deeply to another person, we gain access to forms of communication that are largely nonverbal in nature and quite effective in their own way. The intense nonverbal connection we experience with those we are close to is clearly not appropriate in a work environment, but to the degree we open ourselves up and direct our attention outward to other people, we can become much more effective at reading people. To begin this process, you need to train yourself to pay less attention to the words that the people say and their greater attention to their tone of voice, the look in their eye, their body language, all signals that might reveal a nervousness or excitement that is not expressed verbally. If you can get people to become emotional, it will reveal a lot more on this nonverbal level. It is interesting to observe how how people behave around those in positions of power and authority. They will tend to reveal an anxiety, a resentment, or a sociopathic falseness that betrays something essentially about their psychological makeup, something that goes back to their childhoods and that can be read in their body language. As an exercise, after you have known people for a while, try to imagine that you're experiencing the world from their point of view, placing yourself in their circumstances and feeling what they feel. Look for any common emotional experiences, a trauma or difficulty you've had, for instance, that resembles in some way what they're going through. Reliving a part of that emotion which can help you begin the identifying process. This intuitive form of reading people becomes more effective and accurate the more you use it, but it is best to combine it with other, more conscious forms of observation. For instance, you should take particular note of people's actions and decisions. Your goal is to figure out the hidden motives behind them, which will often revolve around more power. People will say all kinds of things about their motives and intentions. They are used to dressing things up with words. Their actions, however, say much more about their character, about what is going on underneath the surface. You should be sensitive to any kind of extreme behavior on their part. For instance, a blustery front, an overly friendly manner, a constant penchant for jokes. You will often notice that they wear this like a mask to hide the opposite, to distract others from the truth. They are blustery because they are inwardly very insecure. They are the overly friendly because they are secretly ambitious and aggressive, or they joke to hide a mean spiritedness. In general, you are reading and decoding every possible sign, including the clothes they wear and the organized and disorganized nature of the workspace. The choice of mate or partner can be quite eloquent too, particularly if it seems slightly inconsistent with the character they try to project. In this choice, they can reveal unmet needs from childhood, a desire for power and control, a low self image, and other qualities they normally seek to disguise. What might seem like small issues, chronically being late, insufficient attention to detail, not returning any favors on your part, are signs of something deeper about their character. These are patterns you must pay attention to. Nothing is too small to notice. General knowledge, the seven deadly realities. Throughout recorded history, we can detect patterns of human behavior that transcend culture and time, indicating certain universal features that belong to us as a species. Some of these traits are quite positive, for instance, our ability to cooperate with one another in a group, while some of them are negative and can prove destructive. Most of us have these negative qualities: envy, conformism, rigidity, self obsessiveness, laziness, flightiness, and passive aggression. In relatively mild doses, but in a group setting, there will be inevitably people who have one or more of these qualities to a high enough degree that they can become very destructive. We shall call these negative qualities the seven deadly realities. Through study and observation, we must understand the nature of these seven deadly realities so that we can detect their presence and avoid triggering them in the first place. Consider the following as essential to knowledge in acquiring social intelligence. Envy. It is our nature to constantly compare ourselves to others in terms of money, looks, coolness, intelligence, popularity, or any number of categories. If we are upset that someone we know is more successful than we are, we will naturally experience some envy. But for some people, it goes much deeper than this. Usually, because of the level of their insecurities, seething with envy, the only way to discharge it is to find a way to obstruct or sabotage the person who elicited the emotion. If they take such action, they will never say it is because of envy, but will find some other, more socially acceptable excuse. This makes it a quality very hard to recognize in people. There are, however, few indications you can look for. People who praise you too much or who become overly friendly in the first stage of knowing you, who are often envious and getting close in order to hurt you. Also, if you detect unusual levels of insecurity in a person, he or she will be certain he or she will certainly be more prone to envy. In general, however, envy is very difficult to discern, and the most prudent course of action is to make sure your own behavior does not inadvertently trigger it. If you have a gift for a certain skill, you should make a point of occasionally displaying some weakness in another area. Avoiding the great danger of appearing too perfect, too talented. If you are dealing with insecure types, you can display great interest in their work and even turn to them for advice. Conformism. When people form groups of any type, a kind of organizational mindset inevitably sets in. Although members of the group might trumpet their tolerance and celebration of people's differences, the reality is that those who are marked differently make them feel uncomfortable and insecure, calling the values of the dominant culture into question. If you have a rebellious nature or naturally eccentric streak, as is often of the case with those who are aiming for mastery, you must be careful in displaying your difference too overtly, particularly in the apprenticeship phase. Let your work subtly demonstrate your individual spirit, but when it comes to matters of politics, morals, and values, make a show of adhering to the accepted standards of your environment. Later, as you gain mastery, you will have ample opportunity to let your individuality shine through and to reveal your contempt for people's correctness. Rigidity. The world has become increasingly complex in many ways, and whenever we humans face a situation that seems complicated, our response is to resort to a kind of artificial simplicity, to create habits and routines that give us a sense of control. We prefer what is familiar. This extends to the group at large. People follow procedures without really knowing why, simply because these procedures may have worked in the past, and they become highly defensive if their ways are brought into question. It is useless to fight against people's rigid ways or to argue against their irrational concepts. You'll only waste time and make yourself rigid in the process. The best strategy is to simply accept rigidity in others, outwardly displaying deference to their need for order. On your own, however, you must work to maintain your open spirit, letting go of bad habits and deliberately cultivating new ideas. Self-obsessiveness. In the work environment, we almost inevitably think first and foremost for ourselves. The world is a harsh and competitive place, and we must look after our own interests, even when we act for the greater good. We are often unconsciously motivated by the desire to be liked by others and to have our image enhanced in the process. You must understand and accept this deadly reality. When it is time to ask for a favor or help, you must think first of appealing to people's self interest in some way. You must look at the world through their eyes, getting a sense of their needs. You must give them something valuable in exchange for helping you. In general, in your interactions with people, find a way to make the conversations revolve around them and their interests, all of which will go far to winning them to your side. Laziness. We all have the tendency to want to take the quickest, easiest path to our goals, but we generally manage to control our impatience. We understand the superior value of getting what we want through hard work. For some people, however, the inveterate lazy streak is far too powerful. Discouraged by the thought that it might take months or years to get somewhere, they are constantly on the lookout for shortcuts. If you are not careful and talk too much, they will steal your best ideas and make them their own, saving themselves all of the mental effort that went into conceiving them. They will swoop in during the middle of your project and put their name on it. Gaining partial credit for your work, they will engage you in a collaboration in which you do the bulk of their hard work, but they share equally in the rewards. Your best defense is your prudence. Keep your ideas to yourself or conceal enough of the details so that it is not possible to steal them. If you are doing work for a superior, be prepared for them to take full credit and leave your name out. But do not let this happen with colleagues. In general, be wary of people who want to collaborate. They are often trying to find someone who will do the heavier lifting for them. Flightiness. We like to make a show of how much our decisions are based on rational considerations, but the truth is that we are largely governed by our emotions, which continually color our perceptions. What this means is that the people around you, constantly under the pull of their emotions, change their ideas by the day or by the hour depending on their mood. It is best to cultivate both distance and a degree of detachment from other people's shifting emotions so that you're not caught up in the process. Do not take so seriously people's promises or their ardor in wanting to help you. Rely upon yourself to get things done, and you will not be disappointed. Passive aggression. The root cause of all passive aggression is the human fear of direct confrontation. Because of this fear, some people look for indirect means for getting their way. making their attacks subtle enough so that it is hard to figure out what is going on, while giving them control of their dynamic. We are all passive aggressive to some extent, but there are people out there seething with insecurities who are veritable passive aggressive warriors and can literally ruin your life. Your best defense is to recognize such types before you become embroiled in a battle and avoid them like the plague. The most obvious clues come from their track record. They have a reputation, you hear stories of past skirmishes, and so on. If they evade you and delay necessary action on something important to you, or make you feel guilty and leave you unsure why, or if they act harmfully but make it seem like an accident, you're most likely under a passive aggressive attack. At all costs, avoiding entangling yourself emotionally in their dramas and battles. They are masters at controlling the dynamic, and you'll almost always lose in the end. Strategies for acquiring social intelligence. We must, however, acknowledge that man, with all his noble qualities, with sympathy, which feels for the most debased, with benevolence, which extends not only to other men, but to the humblest living creature, with his godlike intellect, which has penetrated into the movements and constitution of the solar system, with all these exalted powers, man still bears in his bodily frame the indelible stamp of his lowly origin. Charles Darwin. In dealing with people, you will often encounter particular problems that will tend to make you emotional and lock you into the naive perspective. Such problems include unexpected political battles, superficial judgments of your character based on appearance, or petty-minded criticisms of your work. The following 4 essential strategies developed by masters, part and present, will help you to meet these inevitable changes and maintain the rational mindset necessary for social intelligence. Number 1. Speak through your work. Your work is the single greatest means at your disposal for expressing your social intelligence. By being efficient and detail-oriented in what you do, you demonstrate that you are thinking of the group at large and advancing its cause. By making what you write or present clear and easy to follow, you show your care for the audience or public at large. By involving other people in your projects and gracefully accepting their feedback, you reveal your comfort with the group dynamic. Work that is solid also protects you from the political conniving and malevolence of others. It is hard to argue with the results you produce if you are experiencing the pressures of political maneuvering within the group. You do not lose your head and become consumed with all of the pettiness. By remaining focused and speaking socially through your work, you will both continue to raise your skill level and stand out among all the others who make a lot of noise but produce nothing. Number 2, craft the appropriate persona. People will tend to judge you based on your outward appearance. If you are not careful and simply assume that it is best to be yourself, they will begin to ascribe to you all kinds of qualities that have little to do with who you are, but correspond with what they want to see. All of this can confuse you, make you feel insecure, and consume your attention. Internalizing their judgments, you will find it hard to focus on your work. Your only protection is to turn this dynamic around by consciously molding these appearances, creating the image that suits you, and controlling people's judgments. At times, you will find it appropriate to stand back and create some mystery around you, heightening your presence. At other times, you will want to be more direct and impose a more specific appearance. In general, you never settle on one image or give people the power to completely figure you out. You're always one step ahead of the public. You must see the creation of a persona as a key element in social intelligence, not something evil or demonic. We all wear masks in the social arena, playing different roles to suit the different environments we pass through. You are simply becoming more conscious of this process. Think of it as theater. By creating a persona that is mysterious, intriguing, and masterful, you are playing to the public, giving them something compelling and pleasurable to witness. You are allowing them to project their fantasies onto you. You must take pleasure in creating these personas. It will make you a better performer on the public stage. Number 3, see yourself as others see you. Almost all of us have social flaws of some sort, ranging from the relatively harmless to those that can get us into trouble. Perhaps it could be that we talk too much, or we are too honest in our criticisms of people, or take offense too easily. When others do not respond positively to our ideas, if we repeat instances of such behavior often enough, we tend to offend people without ever really knowing why. The reason for this is twofold. First, we are quick to discern the mistakes and defects of others, but when it comes to ourselves, we are generally too emotional and insecure to look squarely at our own. Second, people rarely tell us the truth about what it is that we do wrong. They are afraid to cause conflict or be viewed as mean-spirited, and so it becomes very difficult for us to perceive our flaws, let alone correct them. To have the power to see ourselves through the eyes of others would be of immense benefit to our social intelligence. We could begin to correct the flaws that offend to see the roles that we play in creating any kind of negative dynamic. And to have a more realistic assessment of who we are, we can begin this process by looking at negative events in our past, people sabotaging our work, bosses firing us for no logical reason, nasty personal battles with colleagues. In dissecting these occurrences, we must focus on what we did that either triggered or worsened the dynamic. In looking at several such incidents, we might begin to see a pattern that indicates a particular flaw in our character. Seeing these events from the perspective of the other people involved will loosen the lock our emotions have on our self-image and help us understand the roles we play in our own mistakes. We can also elicit opinions from those we trust about our behavior, making certain to first reassure them that we want their criticisms. Slowly, in this way, we can develop increasing self-detachment, which will yield us in the other half of social intelligence, the ability to see ourselves as we really are. Number 4, fools suffer gladly. In the course of your life, you will continually encounter you will be continually encountering fools. There are simply too many to avoid. We can classify people as fools by the following rubric. When it comes to practical life, what should matter is getting long-term results and getting the work done in an efficient and creative manner as possible. That should be the supreme value that guides people's actions. But fools carry with them a different scale of values. They placed more importance on short-term matters, grabbing immediate money and getting attention from the public or media and looking good. They are ruled by their ego and insecurities. They tend to enjoy drama and political intrigue for their own sake. When they criticize, they always emphasize matters that are irrelevant to the overall picture or argument. They are more interested in their career and position than in the truth. You can distinguish them by how little they get done, or by how hard they make it for others to get results. They lack a certain common sense, getting worked up about things that they are really important while ignoring problems that will spell doom in the long term. The natural tendency with fools is to lower yourself to their level. They annoy you, get under your skin, and draw you into a battle. In the process, you feel petty and confused. You lose a sense of what is really important. You can't win an argument or get them to see your side or change behavior because rationality and results don't matter to them. You simply waste valuable time and emotional energy in dealing with fools. You must adopt the following philosophy. They are simply a part of life, like rocks or furniture. All of us have foolish sides, moments in which we lose our heads and think more of our ego as short-term goals. It is human nature seeing this foolishness within you. You can accept it in others. This will allow you to smile at their antics, to tolerate the presence as you would a silly child, and to avoid the madness of trying to change them. It is all part of the human comedy, and it is nothing to get upset about or lose sleep over. This attitude, suffer fools gladly, should be forged in your apprenticeship phase, during which you are almost certainly going to encounter this type. If they are causing you trouble, you must neutralize the harm they do by keeping a steady eye on your goals and what is important, and ignoring them if you can. The height of wisdom, however, is to take this even further and to actually exploit their foolishness, using them for material for your work. As examples of things to avoid, or by looking for ways to turn their actions to your advantage. In this way, their foolishness plays into your hands, helping you achieve the kind of practical results they seem to disdain. That was chapter 4 of Robert Greene's The Mastery.